Hello, and thank you for taking the time to listen to our presentation. Our presentation topic is depression, and the members of our group are Matthew Coe, the data visualization, Michelle Ferriello, the data analyst, Edward Tyler Wilson, the data scientist, and our two project managers, Saju and Anne-Marie. So in this presentation, we're going to be looking at depression, the different demographics, who's it affecting more, the causes, and the effects. So to start off, we just thought we would talk about what is depression. So depression is a common and serious medical illness that negatively affects how you feel, the way you think, and the way you act. Fortunately, it is also treatable. Depression causes feelings of sadness and or loss of interest in activities you once enjoyed. It can lead to a variety of emotional and physical problems and can decrease your ability to function at work and at home. So in this presentation, again, we're going to be looking at the data sets that we got from government sources and medical history. As well, we're going to be looking at heat maps to look at correlation between causes and effects. And lastly, we're going to be visualizing this in Power BI just to give you different views of the demographics to kind of see where these depressive rates are really affecting and who's it affecting the most over time. And that's all. I hope you enjoy the presentation. We had a lot of fun and we found a lot of useful insights. So please enjoy.
My name is Michele Ferriello and I'm the data analyst for this project. When it comes to depression and the data set that we're looking to collect, the objective was to get an understanding of what are the patterns of depression, what are the causes, what are the effects behind it, and get an understanding of what social factors, what environmental factors, what dietary factors. There's a whole list of variables that could contribute to depression, and we wanted to understand what were the main ones and at what level does it actually contribute to it. Unfortunately, because of the breadth of the subject matter that we're dealing with here, there is no perfect data set that captures all of this data and all of this information. So instead, we had to actually go through and find a lot of different statistics and data sources that had various subject matters that we could correlate with the depression rate. The things we were looking for were things like country-specific trends, demographic patterns, and as I mentioned, social, environmental, economic, pretty much anything along the lines that we've heard and we've read that have been linked with depression rates. We also ultimately wanted to understand what were the depression rates looking like? Were they increasing? Were they decreasing? Were they stagnating? Particularly with COVID and the pandemic, our concern was that if we look at very recent timeframes, like for example 2020, the information may be skewed as there were rates of depression that were questioned on whether or not it was actually increasing as a result of the stay-at-home orders that we've received. To that end, we pulled in 30 different data sets, and the resulting file contained 361 columns. And as I mentioned, the day ranges, we stopped at 2019 and we went as far back as 1990, just to make it relevant and to also follow what we were given and provided as far as the data that we found. Once we collected all that data, at that point we started the manipulation process. Now, given the number of various sources that we pulled the information from, they all came in different formats, different column headers, and different countries as well. So we had to filter out the actual data for the relevant countries, which we focused on Australia, Canada, the UK, and US. We separated, because we were looking at demographic information such as gender and age, so we separated those out where available. We removed any data outside of the scope of the study's date range. So again, anything that's beyond 1990 and anything that's newer than 2019, we also removed. And we changed the formats. So things like if it was just a strict value, like in terms of total number, we just switched it to and changed it over to a percentage of the population, just so that it better aligns with the actual data that we were collecting as far as from depression rates are concerned. Then finally, everything was captured and combined into one data file and aligned by year as a means to actually compare the variables and understand the patterns, correlations for the analysis. This spreadsheet here is an example of what the original depressive disorder, so this is what we use as a basis for the depression rate. As you can see here, we had already filtered the United States, Australia, Canada, and the UK. We had to deal with both female, male, as well as an aggregate of the two, and also the year and the percentage of the population. Using pivot tables, we were able to filter out the information that we needed and then copy and paste it into the aggregated file. And similarly, we did that for all other data sources that we pulled the information from. Here is an example of the suicide deaths by age. Again, filtering out the country, changing the column headers, removing unnecessary columns, and exploring the data as it is aggregated in data file. And once that process is complete, we end up with a resulting aggregated data file, which will be used in the next stage of pre-processing in Jupyter Notebook. But before handing it over to our data scientist, I did perform a high-level analysis of the data. In this particular graph that you'll see here, what I did is I pulled the actual health expenditure by an aggregate, so that's across all the countries that we were looking at, and by year, so that we can understand, was spend increasing. And then we also incorporated the female and male depression disorder rate. And what we found was relatively interesting. One, we identified the fact that spending has increased. Now, not all health spending is purely for mental state, but some is, and that is definitely a positive factor. So you would assume that there would be a positive influence on the rate of depression. However, we found that it is quite stagnant. It was flat at best, which is very interesting considering the amount of money that's going in and the recognition of mental health across our societies. The other thing that was quite interesting was that the female population experiences depression at a far higher rate than the male population. Why was the impact of increased health expenditure negligible on the rate of depression? That question was actually partially answered in the next graph. This next graph looked at the age patterns of depression disorders. What's interesting here is that it peaked at the age of 20 to 24 at the rate of depression, and it steadily declined, and significantly so after the age of 49. So the older the population became, the less rate of depression existed within that age group. Now, why is that relevant to the first graph? Well, since our population is aging, that may explain why the actual rates of depression remain flat in spite of the gradual increasing in health expenditure. Since the population is older, the rate of depression is less than it is if our population was younger. It's possible that it is actually a positive impact, whereas if our population was younger, we may have seen actually an upswing in terms of the depression rate. But we actually may have maintained it largely due to the health expenditure. Again, that is a theory. At this point, there's no way of actually making that conclusion, but it is plausible. Going back to this graph, one of the possible reasons that we see a decrease in depression rate as the population ages is stigma of mental health amongst the older generation. There has been a negative stigma towards mental health that's only been starting to be overcome in the last few decades. And it is possible that the depression rate is the same amongst all age group or maybe even higher, but it is not being diagnosed largely to this stigma. Again, this is not something that we can prove at this point, but it is a plausible theory. These are very interesting results that I didn't necessarily foresee.
I will now hand it over to our business intelligence analyst for his insights.
Thank you, Michele, for getting the data for us and doing the high-level analysis. I was tasked with doing the data visualization and breaking down the data into different demographics. The demographics that we'll be looking at are the different countries, so Canada, United States, Australia, United Kingdom, the different genders, so female and male, the different years, we have them here to show over time, and we have the different age groups as well. So originally we assumed that depression was going up over years just to the media. However, we quickly realized that the depressive rates were staying the same. So we wanted to dig a little bit further and see if that's true for all demographics. So looking at country over country, we can see here that most of the countries stayed the same. There was a slight uptick in the United States. And as you can see at the bottom here, Canada has the lowest depressive rates. And we did some research on that, and we found that Canada had the lowest depressive rates just to our health system. People are more aware of mental health issues, so we're not afraid to seek treatment. So that was a good thing. And next we looked at the gender difference in depression. So we looked at the males and females, and we found that females had higher rates of at least reported depression than males did at all age groups. And as well, we started to look at depressive rates over time. So we wanted to see over time which demographics were, which ones were increasing and decreasing. So we found for all the age groups over 50, all of them had decreases in depressive rates. However, the younger generations, we started to see increases in depressive rates, especially from the 15 and 19 year old range, and especially for female versus male. So as you can see, if we filter just for female, we can see that the depressive rates are very high for the younger generation, especially over the years. However, if we switch over to male, we can see there is some increase in the younger generations. However, there is big decreases in the older generations. So lastly, we're just going to look at the demographics that have been hit most by depression and the demographics with the least amount of depressive rates. So as shown here, we can see that all of the top depressive rates are female. At least the top 20 demographics are all female, and as well as the younger generations in America and Australia. And we can see at the very bottom of depression rates, it is mostly males that are older than 60 in Canada, and there are as well some females in Canada as well in the older demographics who are experiencing the lowest rates of depression. So this is really great comparison to do because we can look and see, what are what are the countries doing and the demographics doing right that they have these lower rates of depressions, and what are the generations, what help can we give to the younger generations or as well females. And that's all. I'll pass it on over to Tyler, our data scientist. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Tyler, and I'm the data scientist. So we've established that men and women experience different rates of depression, but I thought maybe we could discuss a few reasons why. So women, for one, experience more instances of depression as they tend to actually ruminate, which is kind of like reminiscing in a negative way about your negative feelings. They're also affected by many natural hormonal effects like pregnancy and postpartum depression. But on a positive spin, they actually express themselves much better than men, and they seek help when they need it. Whereas men, they're four times more likely to commit suicide. 30% of men report experiencing depression or episodes at one point in their lifetime, and men and boys tend to get misdiagnosed as rage issues or anger issues. Also, men, instead of seeking help, will turn to distractions like alcohol, exercise, or work. Now, the unfortunate side effect of untreated depression is suicide. Suicide is the 10th leading cause of death in the United States. 40% of all people who complete suicide have actually made a previous attempt, and 8 out of 10 people considering suicide actually do give some sort of sign of their intentions. Women will attempt to suicide more than twice as often as men, but men are 4 times as likely to actually die by suicide. I noticed a pattern in our data, and if we look at over the four countries that we analyzed, you can see that in the 90s there was a sharp incline in all the early or the youngest age groups compared to the average, which is the blue line, and then even men, which is the squares, and women, which are the triangles. When we cut to our Plotly correlation heat map, uh, we can look at which items from our original data set can correlate to the increase in depression in Canadians. Uh, One of the things that stood out that actually didn't on paper looked like it might have been wrong was that cocaine use, opioid use, and amphetamines actually don't correlate positively to depression rates. My theory behind that is that actually, as depression rates increase, if people increase their cocaine use, for example, now their disorder is different. It's not depression anymore, and it becomes addiction. But there was a very telling story to be told when we look at things like the excuse me, there when we talk about working hours, we can see that there's an 88% correlation between average working hours increasing as depression increases, and that's actually true vice versa. And you can see that also people who typically work more than 50 hours a week tend to be more depressed as well. Another pattern that I noticed on the next slide was that depression rates in the United States for in the 90s actually inclined at about the same rate as internet as households getting internet and computers in that same time frame. And sure enough, it correlates. We can actually see that households with computers and households with internet actually increase the levels of increased at the same rate as depression levels in women and actually in men, although men slightly less. So I'm going to pass this on to Saju Thomas. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Tyler. Hi, my name is Saju Thomas and I am the project manager. Here, I would like to conclude our analysis. As we all know that depression is affecting more than 200 million people, which is treatable. Lifestyle changes, medication, counseling, and therapies are the methods to treat depression. If it's not properly treated, it can lead to suicide. We could understand that there is no specific factor that is affecting the depression. Rather, multiple social and economic factors are contributing to depression. As per our analysis, there is high positive correlation with the drugs like opioid, cocaine, amphetamine. However, cannabis is having a low correlation comparing with the other drugs. This might be the reason cannabis is used for recreational purpose, and 2 years before Canada made it legal. There are other factors which affect depression, that are increased working hours, unemployment, and internet usage, which are positively correlated. However, national per capita is negatively correlated with depression. Now clear that depression rates are not increasing or decreasing, rather, it's almost stagnated over the years. From this graph, it's clear that females are having higher depression rates than male, almost 6% for female and 4% for males. The reason for increased depression rates of female can be domestic violence, assault, gender disparity in different fields, etc. And as Michele stated, the depression rates is stagnated, even the health expenditure was increased over the years. Nowadays, females focus on the career to become independent, and I think depression rate can further fall down in the coming years. The graph, it's clearly see that the lowest depression rates are witnessed in Canada, that is almost 4% throughout the year, and Australia accounts for the highest, and that's near to 5.5. And we can see a decreasing trend for Australia from 2005 onwards. This might be because of the government's measure to treat the depression since 2001. From this chart, we can conclude that teenagers are having highest change in depression rates over these years. This might be because of the pressure they face during those ages, burden of exam, education, bullying, concern over future can be the possible reason, and increased use of mobile or gadget due to the technological advancement are the problem. Older age people's depression rates are decreasing, and this might be because of the thought that they have already lived their majority life and got settled by then. Also, the impact of enjoying their retirement life can also be a reason. From our analysis, it was clear that a spike of depression actually started from 1990. This might be because of the couple war that happened during 90s, and we could see a sudden dip of depression from 2015. And it might be because we already seen that the birth rate is decreasing and the older generations are increasing, and we already analyzed that the depression rates are low for older generation, so that can be the reason for that. Here we can see that the difference in depression rates in the age group of UK and other country. Here the rate is lowest for the age group 15 to 19 of UK, and for all the other countries, depression is lower among the elderly people. A steep uplift of depression rates was witnessed in USA during 1990 and 1997. However, it was stagnated after 97 with 5%. Even though the data of 2020 was not considered due to the impact of COVID, the depression rate has significantly risen due to the domestic violence, lack of socializing, job losses, health issues, yeah, and so on.